Welcome to The Last American Vagabond. Joining me today, I'm excited to welcome to the show Dave DeCamp of antiwar.com. As you guys know, big fan of their work. One of the, in my opinion, a foundational element of independent media and like the real, genuine, nonpartisan, independent media coverage, which I think is lacking and needed today. So I'm excited to talk with him today about a wide variety of things. This will be our first time connecting, hoping to do more in the future. So we'll just talk about some different foreign policy points. I wanted to start today with something that interesting overlap with some kind of constitutional issues. But Dave, it's good to have you on the show, brother. Thanks for being here.
Hey, yeah, Ryan, thanks so much for having me. Good to be here.
Yeah, and as I said, I think I've been, we've touched base over the years, but it's like this. It's funny how this hasn't happened before. I thought the other day, I can't believe we haven't crossed paths until now, because I really just think your guys' work, it stands out. For a lot of reasons. From like me personally, not only just the amazing content and like objective, detail-oriented kind of coverage, but that it's not, it's not trying. To me, everything's clouded today with so much like PR and marketing, just nonsense and noise. And I just really value what you guys do. So I just want to make sure you heard that out of the gate. Let's go ahead and start with something that I thought was important. And let me actually start with this instead. I've got one thing that I want to get into early, but right now with what you're doing, with what you're covering, is there something that stands out to you right now that's like the most important topic in your mind that you think is, maybe undercovered or maybe everyone's talking about it? What would be right now in your mind, like the first thing that jumps to your mind to talk about?
Right now it's Venezuela and bombing these boats in the Caribbean, and now they're starting to bomb them on the other side in the Eastern Pacific.
Mm-hmm.
We've been so focused on Israel and Gaza just because of all the atrocities happening, which is, and not to downplay it, but there is so much focus on that, from other media, which for good reason, because this is all, we're totally on the hook for this. Our government is funding it and supporting it. But this drive toward what looks like a potential regime change war in Venezuela, it doesn't seem to be getting the coverage that it should. Yeah. And also the precedent they're setting with bombing these boats. And, it's like they're bringing the war on terror closer to home in our hemisphere. And then, of course, there's things on the domestic front. And I think a lot of what's been happening is about setting a precedent. I think that's the purpose of some of these, bombing these boats, and also with the, deployments domestically. So yeah, it's kind of just unsettling, like the way that they talk about this stuff. I mean, Pete Hegseth, just last night he announced like, oh, we bombed another boat and we're going to do this. We're not going to stop. And they're just not even trying to like provide any evidence or legal backing. Their attempt at getting legal authority to bomb these boats is like, it's just a joke. But they're just doing it, and nobody's stopping them.
Well, let's go into that. So what's your take on the insight around that? Because, break it down for those, let's say, from people that have no understanding of the constitutional reality. What's supposed to be happening, and why is it that what they're doing is outside of the norm and illegal in your mind?
Yeah, well, the thing is, sometimes, when we talk about the Constitution, like even when I hear Rand Paul talk about it, sometimes it's like, man, the Constitution, like it's almost irrelevant these days. But I think it is important because the idea is that we're supposed to be, our government is supposed to be following it. Mm-hmm. And, when it comes to waging war, the executive is supposed to get authority from Congress. And now, this has just been completely, after 9/11, they got an authorization, which they completely abused, this authorization to go to war in Afghanistan, which they're still using today to justify war in Somalia, Syria, Iraq. But now they're not even doing that. One thing, when Trump bombed Iran, he cited the Constitution. He cited Article 2 that says, that the commander in chief can take military action in self-defense. How is bombing Iran self-defense? And Biden did this as well with some of his airstrikes in the Middle East. So they're just they're not even really trying anymore. And the sad reality is that if Congress voted, maybe when it comes to Venezuela, I think they might not be able to get the support for like a war with Venezuela. But if they had a vote on bombing these boats, unfortunately, they probably would support it. But the way that they're doing it, it's like insulting to our intelligence. So they started bombing boats off the coast of Venezuela. They're claiming, and this is how they're justifying it, Trump has told Congress that we're in an armed conflict with drug cartels. And the claim is that drug shipments coming to America, they're killing so many Americans that it's self-defense. But there's no evidence, for a lot of things. They haven't provided evidence that these boats are carrying drugs, or they're calling these people narco-terrorists, which is basically just a term they're using to justify murdering them, justify carrying out extrajudicial executions for a crime that in the US, if you're arrested and convicted for, you're not getting the death penalty, but yet they're blowing these people up. But then you start looking a little closer at these things. You see Trump, other officials, they talk about fentanyl deaths. Fentanyl just simply does not come from Venezuela. It's not produced there. It's not transported through there. And it looks like most of, this corridor that they've been targeting from Venezuela to Trinidad and Tobago, those drugs are not bound for the US. It's mostly cocaine, and also could be marijuana, could be weed that they're blowing up in the water.
Right.
I mean, it's basically not federally, but basically legal in our country at this point. So you have all that. And then, he's just, you see Trump, like he'll announce one of these strikes and say, oh, if this drug shipment got to the US, 25,000 people dead. It's just absurd.
Isn't it just on the point, on that side point of that, it is just astounding today. And I honestly think that most people see it, as much as it doesn't get pointed to, like it went from like well-crafted, like half lies to just like literally the opposite of the truth in a very bombastic way, like everything today. It's just like things like that. It's like saying that is their narrative. There's nothing to back that up. The evidence doesn't back that up. You can look on government reports. Like you're saying, the point I saw Glenn Greenwald talking about it, that the reality of this is there's like a minuscule connection at best that's coming from U.S. reports, but yet they just yell that out loud anyway. And then major, million follower accounts repeat that, and that gets shared. And it's like how do you battle something like that? It's just like we're waving. It's it's like during COVID-19, which I know you're dealing with similar things. We're trying to go like, look at the facts, like look at, you're saying trust the science. Well, here's the peer-reviewed science, and people just don't want to look at it. It's a whole other game today where we are literally battling some sort of like social engineering cult dynamic. It's like a psychological issue, not like a fact-based issue. But I still argue that what we're doing is paramount, like the facts and reporting. But just on a side note, that's why this is so difficult, because we're dealing with something other than that as well,
Yeah, no. And like you said, it's like they don't really have to try anymore to craft the narratives like they used to, like even with the war with Iran. I mean, there was just nothing there. It was so obviously like a phony pretext.
Mm-hmm.
Even Netanyahu, he did an interview on Fox News, because initially he's saying, oh, we did it to prevent them from getting nuclear weapons. They were months away, weeks away. And then he did an interview, I think, with Sean Hannity, and he's like, yeah, it'd probably take them years to get a nuclear weapon. It's like, this whole war is based on this claim, and they're not even really trying that hard. You had U.S. intelligence saying there was no evidence. Like that's the thing. This time, the U.S. intelligence was saying the opposite. Yeah, and it's just like, it's just crazy. And so I know people kind of on the MAGA right, a lot of them do support the idea of bombing cartels and drug shipments because of the outrage over the drug overdoses in the U.S., which I obviously do not agree with. I think that's very misguided. I think the idea that we could bomb this problem away is kind of like sad that people think that. I think it says a lot about our country.
Yeah, but even really quickly, even if that was actually what was happening, like that's something that, there's a process, there's a legal reality, especially in the middle of international waters. So it's like, if we actually believe in these principles, then we stand by, it shows a lack of principle, at least when it comes to a narrative that makes you feel otherwise. So, continue.
Yeah, no, exactly. And, that's what Rand Paul, you see him on Twitter or whatever, he's stayed consistent with this, saying that this goes against like American tradition, and he's just getting roasted in the reply, like getting ratioed on Twitter by all these MAGA people who are just like kind of blindly supporting this. But the thing is that like, I want these people to understand, who do support bombing the cartels, that that's not what this is about. This is clearly this push toward regime change war in Venezuela, something Marco Rubio has wanted for a decade at least. So, they're really being taken for a ride here.
Yeah. Do you think that there's more to it than that? I completely agree. I was actually just, I think I've got your post right here, looking at this discussion from your post, and, and the idea that this is like strikes on like in Venezuela, like, and even, I think even Trump's administration has been floating the idea that it might be more regime change, but do you think it's more than that? Do you think there's other elements than just like the coveting the resources of Venezuela, like the political dynamic? Do you think there's something else, like maybe related to Israel or some other foreign policy element that is driving the action?
Yeah, well, when it comes to Venezuela, so first off, I do think that, they are expanding the strikes on the boats. Now they're saying they're bombing boats in the Eastern Pacific. So it seems like they're going to increase that. And there's reports that they might even start bombing shipments in Mexico, which, I mean, that if it's against the will of the Mexican government, I mean, what could that lead to?
Right.
But when it comes to Venezuela, I think there's a few things driving this. One of them, obviously, the resources. You have the opposition, the lady, I forget her name, who just won the Nobel Peace Prize, who wants
Right.
the U.S. to invade Venezuela.
Machado, I think.
Yeah, Machado. Yeah.
Yeah.
She's apparently offering, you get us in there, we're going to open everything up to American companies.
Of course, because that's in the interest of Venezuelans, right?
Yeah. So that's obviously part of the one of the reasons fueling this. Another thing is that it's kind of ideological for Rubio and kind of the political faction that he represents, the son of Cuban immigrants, the Venezuelan immigrants in the U.S. who are anti-Maduro, anti-Castro, want regime change in Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua. For them, it's like you see a lot of this stuff on X, like Venezuelans in America who are really pushing this stuff, and sometimes they'll find you on there if you're against it, and they'll really flood you. So that's a motive here. Another thing is like the whole Russia, Maduro's ties with Russia, China, and Iran, which when it comes to those countries kind of increasing their trade relationship, like
right.
It's been so obvious to me, and I haven't been doing this very long, but since I've been like working for antiwar.com full time and doing the news and kind of following this stuff, I mean, it was clear before that all these sanctions, like the U.S. has become so sanction happy over the past few decades. Every administration increases the sanction to try to get governments to bend to their will.
Right.
It was very obvious that you're going to create like an alternative economic system, potentially led by China and Russia, and targeting them both with sanctions. You were going to push them together.
I think by design. Like, I think the reality is to get them to take totally benign, normal actions, or at least just what any other country would do in those circumstances, and then point to the reaction as them saber rattling or whatever. It's like the causing that reaction to use.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. It's creating like the enemies for like a World War III or just a Cold War. But you saw it with Venezuela and Iran. I mean, it was like during the first, I think it was the first Trump administration, or maybe towards the end, or the Biden administration. But Venezuela and Iran started trading gas and oil for gold because they were kicked off the economic system, and they started just shipping gold and gas back and forth to each other. And some of those shipments, the U.S. just outright stole, just like
right.
Actually unloaded the oil, forced the ship to go to Texas, unloaded the oil, and sold it.
Just piracy.
It really is.
To me, that just speaks to, I mean, look, the entire premise, and this is why, if we get into it, I'm glad we started with this, but the overlap to the U.S. side of things that are happening, it's all the same narratives right now, right? So the argument is inherently that they're like, it's like Iran and nuclear weapons or anything else. So isn't that what everybody else does? Yes. Okay. So them doing it's bad because they're bad guys, right? It's something that it's like trading, or even like you're saying, just having trade deals with other countries that the U.S. doesn't agree to makes you a terrorist. It's just illogical. And everyone knows that at the end of the day. So right now it's the same idea. It's saying, if you are protesting this, if you say these words, we pretend you're part of this thing, and we call that terrorism, and it just creates the effort to go after benign things like funding something, and of course that could obviously overlap, but I think that's what this is, like you're saying, like the deals, like why wouldn't Venezuela or others decide to start doing things in the interest of them, whether you think that's the government or the people, that's debatable what they're doing, but I think that clearly they're taking actions to continue to operate, and that's not what they want, so like I forget what it was called, they had that program that they were using their oil reserves to basically benefit the other South American countries before the U.S. kind of destroyed it all. I forget the name of it, but basically there was a program they had where they were pretty much selflessly, they were benefiting from it, but they were using this to give like basically zero interest loans to all these other groups. And it was benefiting all these countries and somewhat rising them out of poverty. And they came in and shut it all down, and it just shows you what the real intention seems to be, And so it all comes back to like control over, just preeminence and them having any kind of influence. China making deals in Africa, for example, is not terrorism. It's just what every other government does, but they're mad because China does it. It's all pretty petty, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, that is a good point. They make benign things, out to be something else. Like, and that's something that you hear because, this term that they use, narco-terrorist.
Right.
And, in some conversation I've been critical of that. And then the people will be like, oh, do you know Venezuela has ties with Iran and Hezbollah? And it's like, well, why? Why was Venezuela, because a lot of people point to that trade between Venezuela and Iran. It's like, well, why are they trading with each other?
And why is that
But
even inherently bad? Like,
yeah,
because Iran is bad guy, right? It's like a very childish mindset. And realistically, Iran, as I know you're well aware, is not even remotely what they claim it to be. And that's the same as Maduro. They lie like they're breathing about these people. That is not the same as saying they're good people. I'm saying I think all governments are inherently wrong, in my opinion. So it's just a deception. And so pointing out that they're making deals with them, it's only bad because it's it's against the interest of the U.S. government. I mean, this is, guys, I mean, this is terrorism. This is economic terrorism and the rest of what they're doing, like with these boats. Back to that is the most terroristic type action I've seen. Like, that's the most like textbook action. And yet because they frame themselves as the good guy and give you a narrative over it, it's supposed to be okay. It's insulting. Did you know that there was some survivors in that? I don't know if you had any more, if you saw any research on that. What do you know about that?
Yeah, and at least one of the strikes, there was an Ecuadorian and a Colombian survived, and the U.S. sent them back to their countries. And I don't know what the fate of the Colombian was, but I know in Ecuador they let the guy go because they said they had no evidence that he committed a crime.
Right. I'm interested on why they did that. You know what I mean? Like, so, I mean, I have a pretty low opinion when it comes to the U.S. government or governments in general. So my first thought was like, why didn't they just kill him? And now people are like, what? It's like, come on, guys. Like, this is what they've done around the world.
Well, yeah, no. And this is what they've done in these specific. I was surprised by it, too, because Nick Turse at The Intercept has reported that in a lot of these strikes on boats, like they just put out a video of like the first missile strike. But in that, I know at least the first one, they had to launch multiple missiles to kill everybody.
Yes.
Which, I mean, it does make it seem like more barbaric for some reason. And then in at least one case, they had to use a 50 caliber machine gun from like a helicopter or something to kill people in the water. So yeah, why did they not just kill these two guys? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, good.
And then the question is, why didn't they send them to Gitmo? They're calling them terrorists,
right?
And I think I saw some report. You never know with this stuff, but that the administration thought it would be too problematic, like that they would get too much heat for it if they did that. Yeah, instead of just letting them go back to their home countries.
Well, the president of Colombia made it very clear, and I think it was even proven as much as it can be in regard to their documentation that the guy, one of the guys that they killed, was a well-known fisherman, and that he's a provable fisherman. That doesn't mean he couldn't also be, trafficking drugs, but it's like this is it's same with what was happening in the U.S. part with immigration. It's like, well, how you could solve all this. Have a process, right? Present your evidence and make your case for why you know that they're terrorists, and they'll just never do that. Like, to the chase of it, I'm of the mind very clearly that this is not drug trafficking, let alone terrorism. Now, I mean, it certainly could have some little overlap with what they call that, but I mean, I'm of the mind that they're literally just killing fishermen. And I ask myself why that is. Now, it's completely my opinion. I mean, it's based on what I think the facts represent, but why, if that was the case, why would they be doing that in your mind? What's the interest for them? Like, this seems to be nothing but negative attention. So what do you think their goal is? Regime change, but why do it this way in your mind?
Well, I think it's about setting a precedent. As I said, it's also, they're doing it. They're specifically targeting Venezuela because they can just do it and nobody's going to stick up for Venezuela. Nobody's going to take their side really. I do think, at least in some of the cases, there were probably drugs on those boats. I know one of them, the Dominican Republic, said that they like some coke washed up on shore or something. But I think in many cases, they're just bombing innocent fishermen. I mean, they're all innocent. It's not like, right? Yeah, like even if you're running drugs, like it's just not, these are people with lives, and like you can't just blow them up. It's completely immoral and wrong.
The idea that we argue that liberty and all these things, and that we argue that the government can decide what you're allowed to put in your body, let alone what people in other countries can put in their body. It's a little bit insane when you really break it down. And so I agree with you. I think there's no world in which you decide without even proving it that people are doing something which I argue is a personal choice. Like, again, it comes down to whether you're arguing, were these going to go to the United States, and even then, how do you know that for sure? And even then, does that mean that that's what's going to happen? And, it's all just built on so much nonsense to me.
Yeah.
So it really is. No, go ahead.
Like I said, it's an insult to our intelligence. Like Trump saying, oh, if this shipment made it to the U.S., 25,000 people would be dead. Like, it just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. Right.
So the question, why are they doing this? I mean, it's a big question, like, I think this is, Again, it's similar to Venezuela. Like there's a few different things driving this. One of them is just the fact that I think part of the thinking is, oh, we have this big military. Why aren't we using it in our hemisphere? And
just to appease the base.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's really. I mean, I think they're using some sentiment among the base when it comes to the drugs. Like they're kind of weaponizing that to do this. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like, what's the real goal here? I mean, do they want to bring the war on terror home? I mean, they already have, obviously, to some extent. But that's the unsettling thing about all this. Like, when the U.S. government considers you a terrorist, that doesn't just mean they think they could kill you. It means they think you could kill you and your entire family and whoever you're with.
Right.
Because we see this with Israel and Gaza and Lebanon, and of course the U.S. in its drone wars over the years, still in Somalia today. That's what that means. And it's like, they're bombing people in our hemisphere now. And, when is it going to come home? I think
this is an excellent question, man. And I think this is where I actually just like to get into Israel after this, because I think that's going to be more of the time. But I just want to point to what I was going to reference in the beginning. And this is why I felt this very much overlaps. So this is exactly where my mind went, especially after I read this article. And it's Trump's first ever Antifa indictment signals DOJ is opening a much bigger case against left-wing groups. Now, the obvious point of the article, which is, whether you like him independent or not, the information is pretty easily verifiable that this is about like we were just describing, whether it's about these fishing boats or anybody else, but this is about Americans, where it's a broad scope. If we argue you're saying the wrong thing in the wrong group at the wrong time, you're a terrorist, right? I mean, this is what they're doing. On top of it, though, this is my point. They make a very clear point that they're right now considering a foreign terrorist designation for Antifa. And I'm like, okay, that's really interesting. And I think what this all amounts to, and this is completely my opinion, that it comes back to the overlapping of what I always thought was the plan. And even from like back when it was the right-wing Nazi red hats, the whole thing, it was there. Remember the vanilla ISIS thing they were floating about, like jihadists working with white supremacists? Like, it's just so ridiculous, but it meets a lot of their narratives and add a little bit of bioterrorism. It all comes together, so my thought is that this is another way to continue the same thing, where now you're going to argue that you have and not even, let's just even remove all the other stuff before. What is Trump doing with the immigration part? Venezuela, but Biden, insurrection, invasion, right? So the moment that you overlap this with the idea of them being a foreign, even just an overlap, then you can open the door to insurrection. You can open the door to national emergency, even though they're already kind of doing that. So that's what I'm really worried about when I saw that was floated, and then it all comes together with the other points about just simply what they're doing to Americans right now with basically no process. And this is just simply many examples of ICE opening fire, and in this case, provably illegitimately claiming that they were run over by a car and then admitting in court that didn't actually happen. Just wild stuff like that. And so that's coming to your point. That is the war coming home. So I'm glad you made that statement, because I think that is 100% where it always seems to have been aimed. What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I think that's clearly what they're trying to do here. And right now, you see people on the right, really supporting this. But I mean, how soon is it going to be that the Democrats are back in power and they're going to use all these authorities to target them?
Right.
Especially with what Biden, some of the things that, the FBI was doing with, under Biden. It just seems so foolish to me that so many people are just lining up to support this. But yeah, and I mean, you look at some of this stuff. So you mentioned the foreign terrorist designation. I guess what are they going to try to like claim that they're getting foreign money or something?
I haven't seen the case they're going to make. It was just a floated statement. And a lot of times that can mean they're just doing that to rile people up. It's like this administration, I'll give them that. They played that well, right? So you never really know what they mean or, what's going to turn out. Greenland, it's a meme, but not really. It's like you don't really know what they mean, But I think that what I get from it is what I was saying is that it becomes an easy way to just label them foreign connected. I would argue Iran, because they're going to be like Palestine. Basically, they've mashed together like Antifa, left-wing problems, Palestine support, even though there's a clear overlap. It's not partisan. And I think we're all beginning to see that it's, anybody can obviously see what's happening. But once you connect it to Iran or some level Hamas, whatever, you can then start making them the same conversation and say this is a foreign invasion that Israel needs to help. Like, I feel like that alarmingly checks all their boxes. But that's just my opinion. But I think I can see it coming together that way.
Yeah, no, I think so too. And they've made it clear, by trying to deport people for criticizing Israel.
Exactly.
You know, and you see the rhetoric around that. They say, oh, they're terrorist supporters. They support Hamas. They're terrorists. When the reality is, like, with some of these people, it was just nothing like that. It was literally just attending a protest, or in one case, it was writing an op-ed saying, you know, that the university I go to school at should not be, you know, invested in these Israeli companies. That was like what the argument
Ozturk,
was.
right? I believe those are
Yeah,
names.
yeah,
And
yeah.
you had Khalil before that, which was the first starting case. When both of those have spun out completely, and no one talks about it, you know, but they were proven to be lying, you know. And there's many cases, by the way, on top of those, of people that were actually like adamantly not supporting Hamas. Like, I don't support, like, calling out certain things, but at the same time, which I think is what a lot of people were doing, like, you know, look at, there was like, for example, the fact that there were some crimes that were committed. And I mean that legitimately. There's a lot of lies around that whole story we can get into. But my point is that there are things they did that were illegal on that day, very clearly. So you have to point that out. But the point is, there were a lot of people that were doing that, and then they still got labeled as Hamas supporters because they say Palestine should not be murdered. You know, it's like, it just becomes like a really ridiculous. But this is our point from earlier, that these narratives, they're not even trying anymore. It's just like the opposite of what the truth is, and everyone just goes, yeah, the thing, and they all just kind of stand by it. It's very weird, you know. But I'm starting to feel like that's not the majority because of how kind of weak that all is, you know. Actually, to that point, and then let's get into Israel. This is still on the Venezuela point. I found this really interesting. This is Fox News. I think you might have shared it. I forget where I grabbed this. Fox News talking about Venezuela. And, you know, yes, they have people on that are sort of like the other opinion, but to have this statement on Fox News, I feel is kind of a tipping point.
Well, I think that there's always a choice, and you're right about the demand issue, and I wish that we could do more about that. And this, I mean, this has been going on forever, that we have a drug consumption problem here and a drug supply problem coming from South and Latin America. So I totally get that. But when you're looking at how this fight is being executed at this particular moment, it doesn't make a lot of sense. First and foremost, the fact that no one can confirm that we've actually been taking out narco traffickers. Or
isn't even that interesting? Like the fact that they're even going, we haven't proven that. Like, that's never usually the partisan argument. It's just blind acceptance of the side's argument. I just find that interesting.
Huge drug traffickers.
Go ahead. You have a comment?
No, I was just going to say, I mean, it is very sloppy, like the way they're doing this, and kind of clownish, like the way Hegseth operates.
I mean, to that point, there was actually a good clip that James Lee just made about, like, you know, the real kind of money billionaire, like, guidance day to day of the operations, that Hegseth is more of like a PR front. I kind of feel like that might be the, like, I was making the overlap to like the Ukraine Zelensky 1+1 rate TV station, like, became his cabinet, which most people don't even know that's really what happened. And then same thing, like, I feel like that might be, we're dealing with like some Zionist kind of like front team that is not really who's in charge. I mean, I'm kind of joking, but there's clear examples of people that, like, I think Bondi and Cash and Dan are like out of their depth. And I think you see that every day with the way they conduct themselves. So it's like, I think there's more to that point that we should be looking for, you know? And so same kind of thing.
Yeah.
However you want to say it.
Oh, good, good.
No, go ahead with this. We'll see what she says.
Last week when we were talking about this, Dana had just seen the alert that the admiral in charge of the Southern Command had resigned. And he was the one who was in charge of this. And the reporting is that he wasn't comfortable with the mission and had been pushing back within the Pentagon. And do you think he would have resigned if everything was by the book? So we have 32 people that have been killed so far, 7 individual strikes. We know that the Colombian president is alleging at least that an innocent fisherman was murdered. We know that there's a family from Trinidad who's saying that a member of their family was killed. And then it is really important that we have repatriated 2 people, one to Colombia, one to Ecuador, because that indicates that we don't have any evidence to prosecute them, that we didn't know who these guys were. Because if you did have evidence, you would bring them before a court. And I know that you're going to make fun of me, and I am prepared for it each and every day. But drug traffickers also have rights. The law applies. We should have the evidence. They should be charged with something, and they should come before a court of law. And Rand Paul was on the Sunday shows this weekend, and he said to Kristen Welker, when you kill someone, if you're not in a declared war, which we are not, Congress with the war powers, you really need to know someone's name at least. You have to accuse them of something. You have to present evidence. So all these people have been blown up without any evidence of a crime. They're also saying that it's about fentanyl, and people who analyze the area are saying that there is drugs that go through, but it's mostly cocaine and marijuana that are headed actually to Europe and to Africa.
It sounds like my show.
The government story
right?
is not adding up.
That's what's so crazy about this. I'm like, and even if they're going to make fun of her for what, making very balanced constitutional, it's just kind of funny. You're, pushing back on the narrative. And I do want to say that I think Rand Paul's statements, as much as I agree with it, were a little bit soft. I think he could have gone a lot harder on the reality of what it was, but I just found that to be sort of important. I mean, I've seen moments like this before, but right now with what that is and how important that is in a lot of different fields of conversation, I found that to be kind of a tipping point. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I think it really shows how weak their whole case is. I mean, the fact that you've killed all these people and have not, and it's not that they just haven't made any evidence to, public for Americans to see. They haven't showed anything to Congress. Apparently, when Congress asked the Pentagon's top lawyer for evidence, he pointed to these videos that they're releasing of those strikes, which don't show anything. That's not evidence of anything. So yeah, I think it's and you wonder, would if a Democrat was in power, is this kind of like something that would be happening? I think this might be more of like kind of a partisan thing, like a Republican Trump thing, this push of just bombing whoever they want. And I bet though, if like say a Democrat wins, they're probably going to continue this because as I said, I think a lot of this is about setting a precedent. Once they start doing this, they're not going to stop. But you did have the admiral, as she mentioned, resign. I mean, that's a pretty big deal for like a career 4-star military officer. The first year into his command of a major U.S. military command resigning.
Yeah,
that doesn't happen. These career guys, I mean, they're not going to resign in the last couple of years, unless there's something wrong or they're against what they're being asked to do here. And
there's a lot of those, like outside the military. There's a couple in the military too, but like lawyers resigning when they're told to lie about Garcia. Like over and over, this keeps happening. And I don't know how many times you could pretend that it's, these are people that Trump put there or that were part of the Republican team and are just going, I have principles. I think that represents back to that other point. What we're actually seeing in this administration is people that just are willing to sell themselves out to gain a little bit of power. And I think that people that might have been more like educated, more insight, more, an actual meritocracy, somebody who might have been good for the position, are just going like, I don't want anything to do with that left or right. So like right now, I think we're on like a downward spiral with this government and people like on a quick note on that. What do you think the world's perception is? Like, I don't mean like, in a political way, just like a general perception of like the way our country is operating. Do you think that people think we look ridiculous right now, or do you think it's business as usual?
I mean, I think with the way this current government is operating, they probably think it's a bit ridiculous. And I think it is, especially with Trump's kind of tariffs, which have been very erratic. It's going to it's pushing these countries, again, toward that kind of alternate global economic system.
Right.
When it comes to bombing the boats, I mean, this is kind of nothing new. If you're just like in another part of the world and it's like, oh, the U.S. is bombing a place, it's not really anything new. So, I don't know. Yeah. But I think for people in Latin America, like, besides Colombia and Venezuela, I guess we haven't seen much opposition from the governments, but I'm sure the people, as she mentioned, you're killing people with families and lives. Like, who knows what kind of blowback this could have. And
oh, seriously. I mean, I don't even think we understand just yet. Like, I mean, whether it's with Colombia or Venezuela or just like a kind of another tipping point of just the peoples of the collective South, whatever, just kind of going like, okay. I mean, like, can you imagine what would be happening if this was, international waters, but off the coast of Florida, and it was any other country they don't like, just literally killing American fishermen, or let's just even say they were literally trafficking drugs. I mean, they would have lost their minds already because that would be seen as encroaching on their domain, right? It's just obvious to see how this will have consequences. To your point about Trump, I do agree, though. I mean, I agree first that I do think it would be happening either way, and I think we both agree it has been going on left and right for a long time. There's regime change, undermining Venezuela, starvation tactics, and sanctions. But I think that Trump's everything right now, whether it's him or just the decision that this is the time to do it all, to roll out the technocratic prison, whatever it is, but that Trump is different. You know, like, I
Yeah.
mean, I guess we saw it in the first administration too. He just kind of takes the mask off. He makes it very clear we're taking the oil, you know. I don't know if that's planned or just his kind of clumsy way, which is usually why I wonder if maybe that's just Israel kind of like dismantling our country, to be very honest about it. But I don't know. I think that that's different in a very clear way. And it is over the top, like more so than I've ever seen. And so, you know, that's where it's kind of on a knife's edge right now, I think, very clearly.
Yeah. And I would say, you know, when it comes to, you know, you got to get people thinking about this, like, you know, where I grew up on Long Island in New York, and we were like ravaged by the opiate epidemic and heroin and stuff. And I remember like people I grew up with got involved, and there was like a pipeline from Brooklyn to Long Island of heroin shipments. And I remember, you know, I knew people that I grew up with that got involved with that. And sometimes you'd hear about a big bust on like the Long Island Expressway. And it's like, imagine if they were drone striked and they were killed on the way home. Like,
Right.
You got to think about it. Like, how would you feel about that? Even if you knew the person was into really bad stuff,
Right.
but they were just killed like that. I mean, it's just, it would never be acceptable to anybody.
Yeah. Well, I mean, broaden it out to what's been going on for our entire lifetimes, right? What if Russia decided to bomb something in Florida because they argued that was some kind of ISIS hotspot and never proved it? I mean, that's what that's the war on terror. You know what I mean? Like, and I'm not going to say there weren't examples of very extremists being involved or killed, or, you know, even just genuine actions by people involved with the government that actually did good in some minor ways. I think overall that it's just obvious that they, you know, that's a precedent that nobody else, if done to them, would allow, or Israel, for example. And we see this every day with that back and forth where, you know, the smallest allegation is enough to spin everything out, but you can prove they're doing it and nothing changes, you know?
Yeah. Especially with Israel. I mean, like they have like a unit, like a military unit, dedicated to justifying killing people, like killing journalists and stuff. It's just crazy. Like, it's so sick. And you mentioned Trump, like how he takes the mask off of everything. Did you see when he was speaking to the Israeli Knesset, when he brought up the Adelsons?
Yes.
And he basically said, my biggest donor cares more about Israel than the US.
Yep.
And like, it again, just such a mask off moment there.
Yeah. And, you know, it makes you wonder what's, you know, he's not dumb. Like, there's places where I could argue that he's, you know, lacking. But I think when it comes to like the, you know, politics, you know, his maneuvering, he can be pretty devious and you know, just successful, let's say. If you read his books, you know, you understand the way he kind of sees this. So the question is, why would he stand there and say something that he must know, that advisors must tell him that his base is uncomfortable with? You don't know. To me, the logical is maybe he was told to and he doesn't have a choice, you know, or he's trying to change their minds. Either way, like to your point, you can't deny what it shows you, along with the 100,000 other points of obvious overlap. Like, again, I don't think it's debatable at this point to even push back on the statement that Israel, at least to a certain degree, controls U.S. policy. I mean, that it's weird that we have, I mean, we know why, but it's sort of like arguing like the influence that the U.S. government has in foreign policy on like Al-Qaeda, for example. With Syria, it's like, we just can't pretend like we don't know what these things are anymore. But the mainstream conversation, mainstream alternative media, they still kind of operate in that way. It's frustrating.
Yeah. Yeah.
But let me ask you something before we get into Israel that I think is something you said earlier that I think is very interesting. And you know, and it's a good conversation to have right now. And this is what I was saying. I bring this up often. You mentioned the Constitution, and you said that you feel like it's, you know, largely might be irrelevant today. Now, the way I would look at it is that it's irrelevant to them, or rather, you might see that because they don't care about it. To me, though, I would still argue, and again, this is actually coming from like an anarchistic position. Like, I don't think the government should exist. I think we should not live in a state of society. However, because we're forced to, right? This is how I always make this argument, which some people don't like, but I feel like we're stuck in this, right? So unless we can, I fight every day to try to convince people about the realities of a world possible without government. But since we're here, I argue that the Constitution, as I've seen historically with where we are, seems to have been the best effort to actually, to some degree, have checks and balances on a possible government society if we're able to sort of maintain the principle of it. And things like fire in a theater, I think, were moments of these principles getting kind of maneuvered, right? So I think that the Constitution within the society is very important. And I think that they don't care about it. And I think at the end of the day, if we were able to bring it back to like core principles and actually adhere to that we could, to some degree, keep them in balance. And especially if we keep it like not like the executive branch can do whatever they want, but actually branches that, even if they all have self-interest and only that at heart, that they're they would check each other because they're meant to in that way. You know what I mean? That's how I look at it. Again, no government would be my choice, but is that what you would see it as, or are you of the mind that the Constitution itself has sort of become irrelevant? Because I think Americans have to have this conversation, you know, like where we go and stop. You know, here's the last point. Republicans in particular right now make the argument that we're protecting and fighting for the Constitution, but we're doing it in ways that break it. You know what I mean? It's like, that's not a valid point right there. That's a contradiction. So either we need to argue, I think, that we should have a fair conversation about why it needs to be changed or altered or removed because it's relevant, or that we go all the way back to core principles. And I'm open to both arguments, you know, so I was curious where you were on that.
Yeah, no, I think, you know, I kind of dismissed the Constitution before. And that's out of kind of just, you know, almost just being tired and, you know, with facing everything that we're facing.
Because they don't care about it.
Yeah. But no, I think the Constitution is very important. And I think kind of, you know, because imagine if we went back to, you know, the government that the founders had in mind, a constitutional limited government republic.
Right. No federal government, you know, like that.
Yeah. Kind of and if we had real money, sound money, like how much better off things would be. Yeah. So I think that's, you know, something that we should focus on, especially when you're talking to people kind of on the right. Like that's who we kind of appeal to a lot at antiwar.com. I mean, obviously, like we have people from all over the political spectrum who read us. But I think when certain people hear those arguments, you know, about, you know, what America was supposed to be, you know, it was not supposed to be a global empire. It was supposed to be a limited republic. That really appeals to a lot of people. Yeah. And, you know, I think, again, we have people who read us who are, you know, anarchists, libertarians, and it's not like we don't need to convince them to get on our side when it comes to war and everything. But, you know, in this kind of war of, you know, information that we're in, and, you know, I like you, I pursue the truth. That's my priority. But we are trying to get people on our side and appeal to people. And I think that's right now, I really think the moment kind of calls for, you know, bringing people over to our side, especially people on the right. Yeah. Because especially when it comes to the wars, like those are the people who are signing up to fight. Those are the people, a lot of young American, you know, MAGA voters who have been fooled by Pete Hegseth to join the military. We see the recruitment numbers going up. Right. So, you know, it's good to get them around our you know, line of thinking. And yeah, the Constitution argument is a great way to do that.
Yeah, no, I agree. Well, and the point just I was making is that, you know, my opinion is very clear, and I will argue the points of why I think that and so on. But I think it's important. It behooves us to have an open conversation about it. Like I say this about free speech, where, you know, same kind of thing. Is there so many dishonest arguments out there where they're like free speech absolutist and then call for censorship? You know, it's like, let's just stop lying to ourselves, right? If you're genuinely of the mind that, you know, whoever out there, that limited speech is where we should be, right? Make your case. Present what you think and back it up. And we can have a fair conversation. It's just, that doesn't happen today. You know, it's like, I would like someone to make an intelligent argument for why they think that might be the case. Maybe they'll win me over. You know, it's so difficult, as you likely know, because there's so much partisan kind of just mania, team sport politics, right? It overtakes everything right now. But going to Israel, because I think this, you know, I've said this, I mean, well before October 7th, but October 7th forward more than ever, that I think that, you know, this is undoubtedly the most important, you know, this is something that everyone should be acknowledging. We should all be covering. But to your point, though, I go through the same kind of frustration where I'm like, you know, there's so many other important things, even especially from like an American centric view, that I have to cover, that it needs to be discussed. So I kind of some days will over focus on one or the other, but then even then I'm like mad at myself for not, you know, it's like I should just be making sure they see it. You know, it's difficult because it is so absolutely jarring. You know, what's going on is I never, ever would have thought you could have, if you would have told me that this was going to happen before, I almost wouldn't have believed you, you know, because of like, why would, you know, just because of how obvious it is, how much has completely spun out, or even just the idea that anybody would have told me that at this point in time, that everyone would recognize what Zionism was, or a large degree of people, what Israel has always been, the occupation, like things that have been like hardcore, you shall not pass. So just an interesting time in all of this. So let's go ahead and let's start with, kind of where we are. Well, I mean, you want to give me any thoughts you have on it in general? And I wanted to start with the idea of like right now with kind of like the reality of where we are, ISIS-linked gangs, the future of it, you know, but any other thoughts before we get into all that of just like the general situation?
Yeah. So you mentioned, the way people are coming around and becoming much more critical of Israel in ways that we never really imagined before. And I know, I'll just tell you an anecdote. I have a good friend of mine who's a Christian. He gets mad at the labels. He's like a Protestant. I'm a Catholic, so I consider, if you're not Catholic, I just think you're a Protestant. But he'll tell you he's something else. But anyway, he's very Christian, and he used to be very pro-Israel. And I think he looked at it from a theological way, and we used to argue about it a lot. I haven't seen him for like 2 years, and I just saw him recently. And he's done a complete 180 on the whole Israel thing. Awesome. And we were talking about it, and basically he's like, "Oh, I looked into it. Like I looked into the kind of the theological reason, and he really, from his perspective, he didn't think that held any weight, like that it was a false, interpretation."
The reason I laugh is just the the idea that it's like, I looked into it, like, well, I didn't do that before,
Yeah.
So keep going.
Well, but I think that's why we're seeing this big shift,
right?
Because people are looking into it because of what they've seen over the past 2 years.
Yeah.
Live stream genocide, massacres of women and children. I mean, every single day. And so I know for him, I'm sure for other people, he been like, okay, why do I need to support this? Like,
right.
huh? And you start looking into it, and that's why we're seeing kind of the Zionists are really freaking out about this, and they're making a lot of desperate attempts to reverse this shift. But I don't think it's going to happen.
I don't think it's possible. I mean, I think that, they've always had just power structures, a large control over the narrative and information flow, for a lot of different reasons, but a lot of ways were, like, especially from this perspective, just like brute force, just you're a racist if you say it. And a lot of power structures would enforce that, and people could be completely shunned from society. We used to pretend that was a left thing. Clearly it's not, it's like very clearly it goes both ways. But I think what happened after October 7th, as you're saying, was you can't stare at dead children every day. Like the average people, the liars out there, the people, opportunists, people that are blindly on the side of the agenda, they'll find ways to ignore it. But the average mom that has been convinced that Israel is from the Bible or whatever, because they called it that after the Balfour Declaration, they are just people that don't know. So when you go on these platforms and you just are bombarded, which is what they were trying to stop, reality. I mean, you just can't let that go. Moms are going to be like, what is happening? Like, all of this can't be fake, and so it just ended up, they shot themselves in the foot. Now, an argument that I always point out that Dave Smith made in an interview a while back was that, and I think this is exactly the right way to always think about this, or like what could have happened. So had Israel, regardless of what they always were and what they've been doing well before October 7th, had they, after October 7th, went right to the UN and said, we were attacked, this is a crime against humanity, and went through the right channels, right? And did that, and did the whole, they would have never had to ask for, they weren't anyway, but think about that. That would have forever been on their side. Instead, they just went immediately to genocide, and they thought everyone would support them. And just, they could have gone through the channels and still done everything they've been doing for 70 years, literally manipulating the process, but they just chose to take it all the way. And that was, for whatever reason, it felt over the top, and people can't put that away anymore, And so right now, I think it's so interesting that we have this situation where, obviously the ethnic cleansing, interesting is the wrong word, but I was thinking about when I said that is the ISIS linked overlap part. But, we have the genocides taking place, the ethnic cleansing, the yellow line, they're all being pushed into toward the water. And the idea that was never, like, remember in the beginning, it was like fake news. That's not possible, whatever. Or the idea that they weren't stopping aid, or, every single day, these new lies are becoming right in front of you. And now even crazier, they're basically going, yeah, that was the case, right? Yeah, we want to take Palestine. Yeah. So where are you at on this with where it currently is? The ISIS, like the current argument of the ceasefire and the reality of like the groups that are actually doing the killing. Like, just give me your take on it before I even get into what I think.
Yeah, so, the situation now, what appears to be like the new status quo after the ceasefire went into effect is, you mentioned the yellow line, which the IDF occupies, more than 50% of Gaza. If people go near this imaginary line they created, they get shot and killed. So it's not like a real peace that we're seeing or a ceasefire. It's more of like a de-escalation. And we're left with this Israeli occupation of Gaza. They're still restricting the aid. They haven't let in nearly as much aid as they agreed to. And so you mentioned the ISIS-linked gangs. So there's a few ways that Israel has tried to break the ceasefire so far. The first one was they claimed that Hamas didn't live up to it because they didn't release all the bodies right away of the
Right.
deceased Israelis who died in captivity in Gaza, even though it was very clear from the deal that they signed and that they weren't going to get all the bodies right away because many of them are buried under the rubble.
Exactly.
So Israel said, "Oh, that's it. We're going to cut all the aid," and basically threatened to restart the bombing. But the U.S. said no. Said Hamas was not violating it. And then the other thing is, so we've seen Hamas kind of reassert control of these areas that the IDF has left. And we've seen a crackdown on people who are alleged to have been Israeli collaborators or criminals. And we do know that Israel has been arming gangs and militias in Gaza. And at least 3 of them that I'm aware of control territory in the Israeli occupied part under the protection of the IDF. But, the crackdown that we saw from Hamas, Trump initially backed it. He said, they're taking out some very bad gangs.
Right.
But so, Israel tried to use that. And it was interesting. Trump said, oh, yeah, we approve that. We said that they can go in because, you look at a war zone like that. I mean, the destruction, the desperation, the starvation, obviously there's going to be a lot of crime. Mm-hmm. There's going to be a lot of people trying to get, but apparently the looting has stopped. And so, Israel tried to use that to break the ceasefire. And then there was this attack this past Sunday, or alleged attack. They claimed a Palestinian militant fired a rocket and killed 2 IDF troops in southern Gaza. There was reporting that they ran over an either an unexploded Israeli bomb or an IED that was planted months ago.
Right.
But either way, whatever happened, they tried to use that to blow up the whole ceasefire deal. They unleashed the bombing. They killed like dozens of people in one day, just basically back to the rate that they were bombing Gaza before. But then again, the U.S. said, basically told them to stop. So, and I'm not trying to give credit to the Trump administration or anything with this. It's just the fact that, this right now, Trump has put his credibility on the line with this deal. He went over and had this summit in Egypt, basically, declaring peace in the Middle East and that it was over. So it's too soon for them to let Israel just completely blow it up. But this kind of new status quo that we're in, it's not going to lead to a lasting peace. There's been no fundamental changes to kind of the problems.
Yes. Isn't that the crux of the point? Doesn't this represent just the exact same situation, but Israel has more property? Yeah. I mean, I don't see the difference.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, it's the pre-October 7th situation, except Gaza is completely destroyed. Mm-hmm. And Israel controls more than half of it. And we see Jared Kushner saying that they might start reconstruction in the Israeli-controlled part. I mean, could they end up building settlements there? Could they Jewish settlements?
I think the Ben Gvir, the settler movement. Well, I forget her name off the top of my head. That one that's become very famous for.
Daniela Weiss, I think.
Yes. They have outlined documentation of where they will go. Also in Lebanon, by the way, with names in Hebrew. Ben Gvir's dancing with them and talking about it at these conferences. Like, it's not a secret. Now, whether or not that is like at the highest level, like actionably happening through Netanyahu and who knows? But I do believe that. I think it's something that they're all very aware of. And the plan has always been to take this. I mean, what do you think about that? Do you think that the plan from the beginning was to ultimately take all of Gaza and this was just all narrative to get there?
Oh, yeah, I think so. From the beginning, they've wanted the ethnic cleansing, all the Palestinians to go.
Yeah, I feel like I've said that many times.
Yeah, and I mean, the problem for them, and I think what we saw over the past 2 years was how like a modern country in 2025 commits genocide. Like, they put all this plausible deniability on top of stuff. Mm-hmm. They say, oh, anybody who crosses this line is a terrorist. If we shoot him in the head, we could say they were a terrorist. And
like Obama's combatants, right? If they're in a place we bomb, then they're combatants. That was Obama's fault.
Yeah, exactly. And the strikes, collapsing entire apartment buildings full of women and children, saying, oh, there was a Hamas guy there. Like they always have their little justification. But if you're doing that over and over and over again, it's clear that the purpose is not killing a Hamas guy or two. The purpose is killing Palestinians.
Yeah. And interesting overlap again. It just keeps jumping to my mind. I very much believe, I think that's clear by now, that this is coming home to us for, however you look at it. In Chicago, Donald Trump's, the ICE, well, I think it was more than ICE, but they remember the whole military coming down from zip lines and helicopters. It turns out in that whole building that they completely raided, they claimed there was one guy that was linked to Tren de Aragua, and that's not even provable. After everything they said. So it's really the same ultimate point. Now, they didn't bomb the building, but it's the overlap, whether that's because they just see that being normalized or not. I just think that terrifies me coming home,
Yeah, yeah, that is scary. Yeah, that parallel there.
I wanted to ask you about the ceasefire violations, right? So I mean, I've read through what the documentation that I can see, but it always seems to be so new, like deliberately muddied, like where Netanyahu's got like his own point plan that's like 5, I guess. They got the 8 point, like it just, and they all like act like they're on the same page. Like I think that's by design. But my point is, I'm of the mind that these things were immediately ceasefire violations. And what I want your insight on whether that's the case, like the yellow line itself. Now, see, they claim it's like where we can control and that we're going to build where we're safe. But I thought the argument was they were allowed to go back to the north. And the point is they were shooting anybody that tried to go back there, acting like they were the ones violating it. Isn't that in and of itself a violation on top of the food and the bombings that were taking place every day since they claimed they were doing it?
Oh yeah, yeah. I would say it's a violation, shooting people, unarmed people.
Well, I mean, but the line itself, and any other things that you think were violations, like what did you see in all that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the line, like, the deal was clear that Israel would pull back to this line. It was very vague. I mean, it was literally like a line that they drew on a map. So I think Israel has the ability to kind of justify that to the U.S. to say, oh, this is our line. This is what we agreed to.
But as I understood it, the Palestinians, regardless of the line that Israel controlled, were allowed to cross that to go back to their territory in the north. Was I wrong about that?
I actually don't know. I don't know if that was spelled out in the deal.
See, I think
but they were allowed to go north. Like they did go back north through the area that was beyond the yellow line.
That's what I thought.
And then,
right.
Yeah. And then the people, so if you look at the line, like you're able to travel north and south, in the west of Gaza on the edge.
Oh, right.
In
Okay.
an area that's not controlled by the IDF.
Yeah.
But where we've seen, I think, most of the killings happen is in Gaza City, where in the neighborhoods in the east, parts of them are occupied by the IDF, parts of them aren't. And you had people just going to see like the condition of their house and they would get shot or drone striked.
Right.
Which, I mean, again, there's just no world where this is acceptable, like under a ceasefire, unless you think these people are animals, unless that's your view of Palestinians. Yeah, there you go.
So, yeah, so this is good. I forgot I had this. So this is the 58% for crying out loud. I mean, it's just, this is such an insult. But so what I was on the impression of is that ultimately that the entirety of the Gaza Strip, they were allowed, like you're saying, if they had their home. And I thought that was like a central part of this, that they were allowed to go back to wherever that might be. And that this was just what Israel controlled. Now, the point is, I guess we don't know for sure, and I don't either. But it's like, I think the whole point is they create these opaque kind of like undefined elements that they then just argue they violated. And the U.S. government's going to back what they say. That's how I read it. And there's plenty of examples like that. I mean, do you see any more openings like that you see that might be exploited to claim that they're violating it?
Yeah, well, they did that with the bodies.
Right. That's right.
Yeah, no, but that's a good point about this, because especially for the people on the ground, like, okay, there's a ceasefire, we could go back north, and like nobody's told us about this line that we can't cross, and like it's just setting up people to be killed almost.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, the whole thing now is the disarmament of Hamas.
Yes, and to say it out of the gate, Trump's the one that already argued that they would be allowed to rearm, and that's not getting much discussion.
Yeah, he said that they gave them permission to do it.
Yeah, right.
To go back and kind of reassert control, crack down on crime. So that's the big thing, and I think that's ultimately what is going to blow the thing up, is that they're not going to reach any deal that on this, and because Hamas hasn't agreed to disarm. The 20-point plan that was released by the White House said that Gaza would be demilitarized. What Hamas agreed to was enter a ceasefire, release all the hostages, and then negotiate on those points.
Right.
And the thing about, it's not about Hamas. It's about, I mean, their position is that in order for them to give up their weapons, there has to be basically a Palestinian state or a Palestinian military force that can replace them.
Right.
Because, if they give up their weapons, Israel, they know Israel's going to, or they think Israel's going to find an excuse to just go in and, kill everybody.
I mean, it's already kind of what they're doing, right? I mean, the argument that they violated that, they were bombing the entire time, but essentially that's what's already happened, right? I mean, because Israel's already made the claim. Maybe they haven't gone back to full war like they were before, but isn't that already kind of the de facto reality?
Yeah, no, it is. It is already kind of like that. But I think that's going to be the major sticking point. And it's interesting because Trump, some of the things that he said about Hamas, he said, he said, a lot of these Hamas guys, they're young, they weren't around when things started. And I think what he's kind of saying there is acknowledging the fact that, this is a question I see Piers Morgan always asks, like, people who are critical of Israel, like, what would you have done on October 7th if you were in Israel? What should they have done? And he says, the context, the history, that doesn't, it's irrelevant to the question of what would Israel, like, what could they have done after October 7th that you would have been happy with? And the fact is that, Israel was going to do something, like, despite all the context and history and everything. So what should they have done? Well, now you could take the same view of the Palestinians in Gaza. If you were just a regular guy living in Gaza, October 7th happens and Israel bombs and kills your children or your mother, or what are you going to do? What is that guy going to do? And that's how Hamas has been able to, recruit people.
Right.
And I think that's kind of what Trump was kind of acknowledging there when he said, a lot of these people were young. Like, if Israel kills your family and you want to resist, I mean, there's really only one game in town, Hamas or Palestinian Islamic Jihad.
Right.
And all the leadership has been killed. Hamas's leadership in Gaza has been wiped out. Obviously you have people replacing them, but it's just, this is a reality. Like, if the US, Trump really wants peace, they know that they're going to have to accept that whoever's in Hamas now is going to be part of Gaza, is going to be part of maybe the government or military or whatever. That's just the reality. Yeah. So, and the thing is that I don't think they're going to really be able to continue to maintain this pressure on Israel, or, to keep the ceasefire deal. I mean, you see what's happening this week. It's like every U.S. official is going over there.
Right.
So yeah, the way the whole thing is set up, I think it is kind of bound to, it's just not going to lead to a lasting peace. On the other hand, things are changing when it comes to the U.S.-Israel relationship. All these goals that Israel has for the region, expanding into Lebanon, Syria, even though nobody talks about the invasion of Syria,
or Lebanon for that matter. It's wild to me that even the ceasefire violations, Craig Murray maybe, but like nobody talked about it.
Yeah, and that's just going on like every day. I mean, today they just bombed Lebanon again. But all this stuff requires U.S. support, military support, and political support. So, and the Israelis know that they might not have that forever, at this point.
Which is all the more reason for me, by the way, why I argue that there's effort, more so than I think we already see, for Israel to bully its way into controlling this administration, which is what I think is already happening, by the way. But that's my opinion. Like the Zionist administration. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think Netanyahu could see this administration as like his last shot to do the things that he wants to do.
I mean, I'm kind of more getting at the idea that over a long period of time and how this has been changing, I think, we know that governments operate this way, like the idea of trying, and especially with the special relationship of like kind of the blurring the line between IDF and the U.S. military, or, all these different things that I think we've literally seen an infiltration of our government. And we can just talk about that in one of the latter points in all this. Like, what are your thoughts on this? Like, of not just political like maneuvering, but like I don't think Manchurian candidate would be the right term, but like, somebody who is working on behalf of the Israeli government that, for like a intelligence level that ends up working its way into an American position in the government. However that plays out, whether it's from a long-term play or just whatever else, like even a Brian Mast in their IDF, I just find that to be insane, whether it's the Chinese military or British military, and so as you see all this, I mean, what do you think the reality of that is? And it's just, we're talking opinions here, but do you think this is more about like, even back and forth where people argue that the U.S. controls Israel, I think it's pretty objectively the influence goes the other way predominantly, but to what degree do you think Israel can potentially control U.S. policy?
Yeah, no, I agree that the influence mostly goes, from Israel to the U.S. But I think right now what we're seeing is a very pro-Israel Trump administration kind of being like, all right, you got to take it easy for a little while
because of their reputation.
Yeah. And who's been negotiating this? Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. I mean, you talk about Israeli infiltration, like Kushner's ties with Netanyahu going back to his, to when he was very young. His family has known Netanyahu for a very long time. These are the people negotiating the deal. I mean, that's another sign that it's probably not going to really lead to anything lasting, because you had Kushner involved in the first administration's so-called peace plan that they unveiled for the West Bank, which was just never going to be accepted by the Palestinians. It was probably designed that way. And
as you mentioned, by the way, the West Bank is, I mean, I mean, it's funny how little attention this gets as well, but the West Bank they've now declared that they're taking control, right? And that's something that Trump has come out and said is not being allowed to happen, that Jordan said they would never allow it to happen, and it's Miriam Adelson paid him $100 million to let it happen, and now it's happening. It's on top of everything else. It just is such a slap in the face.
Yeah. Well, there's a whole thing today, actually. Vance said, because the Knesset advanced a bill to annex the West Bank while Vance was there.
Right.
And Vance said it was a political stunt. It was stupid. And that, they're not going to annex the West Bank under the Trump administration.
But they are.
But yeah, I think focusing on like official annexation kind of misses the point, because they're expanding settlements, and the Israeli settler terrorism that's happening in the West Bank is all increasing and increasing and increasing. And you have the U.S. ambassador there saying that God gave them the land. So it's like the de facto annexation is continuing.
And there was a U.S. journalist that just got ambushed by the IDF and a bunch of settlers recently, at least by his claim, which is wild to me. And that's what it appeared to be. This whole thing it's just there's so much. I think there's so many desperate elements to this that things are just very unsettled. Like, this could go in any number of directions because people are acting irrationally, like whether we're talking like Samson option or just like burning it down, like in regard to, any number of things. I think that people can act in very desperate ways when they're up against the wall, but so in regard to like the rearming, we'll kind of end with this in regard to where this might go, because I think the way I view this, and I'll just show these as well, since I had these included, and I'll put this all in the show notes. They were even discussing this from the World Food Program, that they're saying, look, like we can literally see right now that the looting has stopped because Hamas has removed these gangs from the conversation. So it's like, pretty clear what's been the problem. These ISIS-linked gangs that have been looting. And that's not to say that there's not other actions of Hamas or crimes. It's just about acknowledging the large picture of what they've always been claiming as Hamas the entire time. And so ultimately we have this evidence of the gang overlap, in their Knesset discussing that they're working with ISIS-linked gangs, and why that's not the biggest story in the world is insane to me. Or which one was that? I forgot what this was. But my point is that I'm thinking that it looks like, at least as one of the possibilities, that this ISIS-linked gang element is what they're trying to sort of swap out for what's currently in Gaza, and maybe even calling it Hamas. Just a thought that I had, but ultimately trying to kind of use them, as you said, even some of the groups are controlling territory now, as sort of like the element they'll switch to, and it ends up being just like they did with Hamas. Now, that's not to say that Hamas was entirely under Israel's control. People can debate about that, but that they funded them right up until pretty recently is not debatable. That doesn't, by the way, undermine the act of armed resistance for an occupied territory. All that being said, what do you think about where this may go with the groups, whether or Hamas or the future of it in general? Just kind of wrap up. What do you think this will go?
Well, yeah, no, I think that's a way that Israel can really, screw up the ceasefire deal, is through supporting those gangs and militias. Because you have Hamas saying they said that they would give amnesty to any armed group if they turn their weapons in. But these groups are saying that they're not going to give up their weapons. So, the idea of stoking kind of like a, inner Palestinian internal conflict is something I think Israel wants to do here. And, you mentioned the Abu Shabab gang, which is like the biggest one in southern Gaza. This guy who leads the gang, according to the UN, he was responsible for the most aid looting, his gang, in 2024. Right. And that's who Israel decided to arm. And then Israel used, and they targeted the Hamas police force, bombed them, killed them when they were providing security for aid shipments. And then they armed the looters, and then they use looting as a justification to cut the aid and starve the people. So, I mean, it's just like so sick the way that they did it. So, yeah, I think, and like, could they use one of these gangs and say, okay, you're the official, I forget like the name for one of them, but they have like an official sounding name, be like, okay, this is going to be the force in Gaza, and then prop them up for a whiwhile. And then,
maybe as the resistance group, like we saw in Syria, right? Like they're the ones fighting for freedom from the population. It's an organic uprising. Like it feel like they never have a new narrative. So that seems to fit,
Yeah. And then that could, and turn to be the Israeli strategy, especially if they pull out of more of Gaza, is kind of stoke the civil war.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. I mean, they're not going to stop messing around there. Like, it's not like they're just going to give it up.
Yeah, unfortunately, I agree. But I think that what you're doing with antiwar.com and everybody else on the team, and just anybody out there who's genuinely, I mean, which is just crazy that we have to act like this, that it is unique is wild to me, but just that we care about the truth more than anything else, right? It's about just finding the facts, breaking down the reality of it, ignoring partisanship, it's just about being objective, standing by your principles. It's just that seems to be very lacking in the field right now. And there's a lot of people, though. I'm not going to diminish. There's a ton of people that I think are outstanding, but the people that get pushed into our view in the mainstream alternative media and everywhere else, I mean, it's a dangerous time. And so I'm really thankful for the work that you do, and hopefully we can connect again in the future, because I think that conversations like this it's very helpful for people to watch, to kind of flesh these things out, to consider possibilities where it may go, and hopefully we can do something about it, man, because I got to be honest, of all the things I've covered, I have an ability to sort of be able to put things away, and I think that's why I'm good at this. I care very deeply about this stuff, but I'm able to sort of go out, my garden, and just kind of, put it on my mind. But of all the things I've ever covered, I have a hard time doing this for obvious reasons, because it makes you feel like you're failing them in some way by not, because it's so obvious, and yet it still goes on. It's like, am I not doing my job? But it's that we are, I think, and that's why this whole thing is so desperate. Like the power structures are so obviously up against a wall that I just, we got to keep pushing at the very least, because we know what we're fighting for, man. So thank you for all you do. Anything else you want to leave us with? Last events or anything?
Yeah, well, I really appreciate all that, and thanks for having me on. I've always liked your work and everything, and it is surprising that this is the first time we've actually talked. Like I remember when you invited me on, I was like, didn't I go on there before? But no, I haven't. Yeah. So yeah, it's really cool to talk to you, and I really enjoyed the conversation. So yeah, let's definitely do it again sometime. And people could follow my work at antiwar.com. I do a show. It's like a daily short news show of U.S. foreign policy of the news that I cover. It's called Anti-War News. It's on all YouTube and all the other platforms, Rumble and X and stuff. So outstanding. Yeah, people can check that out.
Well, I'll include all that and your links in the show notes, so make sure everyone can follow up on that. And thank you for being here. And as always, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.